afraid of, Rosemary. Honest and truly, there isn't.
There's nothing but a mild sedative to calm you down.
You know I wouldn't let anyone... Oh. Rose! Rose! Rose!
Help me!
Oh, Rose, baby.
Somebody help me!
Now, horror movies probably don't get much more influential than 1968's Rosemary's Baby, directed by the infamous Roman Polanski and starring Mia Farrow and John Cassavetes. This movie regularly turns up in those top 10 horror movie lists, despite being far more of a brooding, subtly creepy, occult psychological drama. Now, when I rewatched Rosemary's Baby recently, somehow I'd totally forgotten it featured an odd and brilliantly surreal dream sequence in which naive newlywed Rosemary Woodhouse, played by Mia Farrow, is raped by the devil while a bunch of naked old people stand around her and chant. It's a great sequence. The fact that Rosemary isn't sure what's real and what isn't really feeds into the entire tone of the movie, and one which is a perfect blending of horror and dark comedy. Let's take a look. Now, if you've yet to see this film or you haven't seen it in a long time, it may surprise you just how much of a subversive film it is. I can't imagine how it went down when it was released back in 1968. And it's been ripped off and imitated so many times that it's lost some of its impact over the years, I guess. But it's still a masterpiece of claustrophobic dread 50 years later. Now, Polanski's movie opens with newlyweds Rosemary and Guy moving into the Bramford, an exclusive New York apartment building. Guy's an actor who, despite having appeared in 2 off-Broadway shows, is still waiting for his big break. And his professional failings are the catalyst for the whole movie, really, which we'll chat about in a few moments. See, upon moving in, Rosemary seems happy to settle into a life of domesticity and is very eager to start a family in their New York apartment, the foreboding Bramford, which is actually the Dakota building on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I love that Guy and Rosemary appear to be the only young people living in the entire building, aside from another young woman named Terry, but she ends up jumping out of a window quite early on.
Want to let these folks take a look, please?
She got deeply depressed every 3 weeks or so. I told my wife about it, but she poo-pooed me.
Well, it doesn't mean she killed herself. She's a very happy girl.
The couple's off-the-wall neighbours, Minnie Cassavetes and her husband Roman, basically steamroll their way into their lives and even insist that she uses their doctor, the sinister Dr. Saperstein, once she discovers she's pregnant, and then things get really weird.
This is no dream. This is really happening.
So Mia Farrow, in her greatest role probably, becomes instantly iconic as the gaunt, pixie-haired innocent who may or may not have been chosen as the surrogate for a satanic coven of witches. She knows that something's wrong with the baby she's carrying, but she can't quite get anyone to listen to her. Everyone around her seemingly in on the conspiracy, even her husband, and any other friends outside of her building that she confides in end up being the victims of some surprise tragedy.
My name is Rosemary Woodhouse. I had an appointment with Mr. Hutchins. Is he there? Hello?
He was taken ill this morning.
Taken ill?
Yes. He's in a deep coma at St. Vincent's Hospital.
Now, one of the cool things I noticed on rewatching Rosemary's Baby was a pivotal scene that occurs early on when the couple are invited round their bonkers old neighbours for dinner. If you're familiar with the film, you probably already know it. And if you're not, you might just miss it. But it's a perfectly innocent scene where the two ladies just do the washing up, and for a split second, Rosemary peeks out into the living room where her husband and the old Mr. Cassavetes are sat chatting just off camera. And I think this is the moment that Rosemary's husband makes his Faustian pact with a senior Satanist. So Roman Polanski, and I think this was his first US film, creates a brooding and very creepy occult psychological drama. He turns New York and the Dakota in particular into something almost medieval looking. And the film doesn't come packaged with half a dozen jump scares. It just has a clammy dread to it, if that makes sense, a dirtiness. And when the lovely Mia Farrow turns up with that haircut and begins to take on the demeanour of some kind of drug addict, as her creepy physician and apparently kind-hearted neighbours fill her full of strange herbal remedies, the pregnancy doesn't quite give her the glow of motherhood, but still managed to make Farrow a style icon, spawning a plethora of pixie-cut copycats.
God,
It's Vidal Sassoon. It's very in.
what's wrong with you?
Do I look that bad?
Terrible.
You're not on one of those Zen diets, are you?
No.
Now, I think most movies with similar themes to this one would probably portray their villains as seductively evil, whereas Rosemary's Baby's Satanists are a bunch of nosy nutters. So much so that it's difficult to tell if their eccentric behaviour is an act. They're actually more irritating than evil. And the film's real strength is that it lays this kind of horror tale over what are, for the most part, perfectly normal events often experienced by pregnant women. And whether we like it or not, the characters here are thoroughly believable. We've all had elderly, friendly neighbours who we like but sometimes wish would leave us alone a little bit, or a friend that's ceased to socialise because they've got married and fell pregnant. The real villain in Rosemary's Baby isn't the building's coven of nutcases, or in fact Satan himself, but actually Rosemary's husband, played by John Cassavetes, who seemingly sells his wife and her unborn child into evil for the reward of a glitzier career. Now, for more modern audiences, the wheels might turn a little too slowly for their taste here. It's not a short film, and it's more than happy to take its time showing us the day-to-day lives of Rosemary and her husband. Also, when you start hearing odd chanting through your bedroom walls and the neighbour's young lodger jumps to her death, more alarm bells probably should have started ringing. But despite the film's faults and its age, there's no denying the effectiveness of the movie's now infamous final act, with Farrow's incredibly stirring turn as the now defeated protagonist really adding believability to a brilliantly over-the-top climax. Now, Roman Polanski would revisit similar themes of building-based paranoia with The Tenant a few years later, but of course Rosemary's Baby is historically significant, being the film he would direct before his pregnant wife Sharon Tate was murdered by the Manson family. His next film, an adaptation of Macbeth, is probably one of the most downbeat and miserable films of the 70s. And Rosemary's Baby, for the most part, comes off as a bona fide classic of the horror genre, although it was followed up by more outrageous satanic offerings, The Exorcist, The Omen, etc. It still packs a bit of a punch after all these years. Go check it out.
Don't argue or make a scene. Because if you say anything more about witches or witchcraft, we're going to be forced to take you to a mental hospital. You don't want that, do you? So put your shoes on.
We just want to take you home. No one's going to hurt you.